So here's a massive question. How does a country with over 1 billion people, one that's rocketing toward becoming an economic superpower, also take on some of the biggest environmental crises on the planet? Well, this is what we're calling India's Green Gauntlet. It's this incredibly high-stakes balancing act between what its people need right now and the long-term health of our world.
Okay, so to really get a handle on India's solutions, which are, incredibly ambitious, we first have to understand the sheer scale of the battlefield. We're not talking about just one problem here. It's a convergence of threats that experts are now calling a triple planetary crisis.
And this quote from the UN Environment Program, it just lays it all out there, doesn't it? It's a war on 3 fronts at the same time. A climate that's changing fast, pollution that's everywhere, and the loss of biodiversity, which is accelerating. And the tough part is, these aren't separate issues. They're all tangled up, a web where each problem makes the others even worse.
14. Just let that number sink in for a second. According to the World Health Organization, 14 of the entire planet's 20 most polluted cities are in India. And this isn't just about some hazy skylines. No, this is a full-blown public health emergency, and it's a huge economic hit too, costing the economy something like $36 billion in lost GDP every single year.
Then there's this number, 600 million. That's how many people, according to India's own policy think tank, Niti Aayog, are right now dealing with high to extreme water stress. As the world's biggest user of groundwater, that is a ticking clock. It affects daily life, industry, and maybe most importantly, the ability to feed the whole nation.
And finally, number 7. That's where India ranks on the Global Climate Risk Index. That makes it one of the most vulnerable nations on Earth to disasters caused by climate change. We're at a point where 3/4 of its districts are now considered climate hotspots. So the risk of devastating floods, droughts, and cyclones, that's not some far-off threat anymore. It's happening right now.
So when you're facing a crisis of that magnitude, what's the response? Well, it has to be a plan that's just as massive. And that's exactly what India has done. It's laid out this strategic and, frankly, incredibly ambitious blueprint to tackle these challenges head-on. And right at the very heart of this blueprint, you'll find a 5-point pledge. It's called Panchamrit, which means the 5 nectars. This was announced at the big COP26 climate summit, and these 5 promises are now the absolute bedrock of India's entire climate action strategy. So, what are these 5 pledges? The goals for 2030 are just breathtaking. We're talking about hitting 500 gigawatts of energy from non-fossil fuel sources, getting half of all its energy from renewables, cutting a full 1 billion tons of carbon emissions, and slashing the emissions intensity of the economy by 45%. And the big one, the ultimate goal, hitting net zero emissions by the year 2070. That's a huge statement of intent to the rest of the world. And if you want to see just how serious this is, you just have to look at how India has ramped up its formal promises to the world, what are called its nationally determined contributions. The update in 2022 was a giant leap from the original plan in 2015. The emissions intensity target jumped from around 35% all the way to 45%. The goal for non-fossil fuels went from 40% to 50%. These are not small tweaks. This is a quantum leap in ambition.
Okay, so ambitious policies are one thing, right? But what does this fight actually look like on the ground? Let's go to the front lines of conservation, to the ecosystems that are the literal life support systems for the whole subcontinent. And you really can't find a better example than the Himalayas. They're not just a mountain range. They're called Asia's water tower for a very good reason. This one single ecological zone is critical. It drives weather patterns and water scarcity for more than 1 billion people. The stakes here are just immense. On one side, you have their incredible value, right? The source of fresh water for 1.5 billion people, a global biodiversity hotspot. But on the other side, the threats are honestly terrifying. The glaciers here are melting faster than anywhere else on Earth, which dramatically increases the risk of catastrophic floods and landslides. It's an incredibly fragile system, and it's under extreme pressure. But this conservation effort, it goes way beyond just the Himalayas. India has actually built this multi-layered defense system for its natural treasures. This includes 18 biosphere reserves that protect over 30% of the country's biodiversity,
80 internationally recognized Ramsar sites to save critical wetlands, and a huge network of parks and sanctuaries, all of it backed by the foundational Wildlife Protection Act of 1972.
All right, let's turn to the daily war that's being waged against pollution. This is all about making sure we have cleaner air, cleaner water, and cleaner land, and doing it through a mix of big, large-scale programs and some really strong laws.
So if you look at the main culprits, it's a pretty clear picture. You've got particulate matter from car exhaust and construction dust that clogs our lungs. You've got untreated sewage that leads to all kinds of waterborne diseases. And then there's plastic waste, from single-use items that chokes our drains and devastates marine life. Each one has its own source, and each one has its own devastating impact.
Now, to fight all this, India has built a pretty comprehensive legal arsenal over the last few decades. There are specific laws for air and water pollution, specific rules for managing plastic and e-waste, and it's all tied together by this powerful Environment Protection Act from 1986, which kind of acts as the umbrella law for all environmental issues. So the framework is definitely in place. So with all these plans, all these laws, how is India actually doing? It's time for a reality check. Let's take a look at a balanced scorecard, looking at the major successes and, well, the challenges that just won't go away.
And this report card, it really tells a story of stark contrasts. On the plus side, a massive win. India actually hit its 50% non-fossil fuel electricity capacity target 5 years ahead of schedule. That's huge. It's now the world's third largest renewable energy producer. But on the other side of the coin, ambition sometimes struggles with reality. A key tree planting program, the Green India Mission, has had its funds massively underutilized, and the nationwide plastic ban often suffers from poor enforcement underground.
So one of the key institutions designed to fix these enforcement gaps is the National Green Tribunal, or NGT. Think of it as a specialized court that was created specifically to fast-track environmental cases. The whole idea is to provide speedy justice and hold polluters accountable. It's a really critical piece of the puzzle.
But top-down enforcement isn't the whole story here. A really central theme in India's path forward is something called the Life Movement. This Lifestyle for Environment initiative is all about connecting national policy with our individual choices. The goal is to transform conservation from something the government tells you to do into a real people's movement.
And all of this, it brings us to the ultimate question. It's the core dilemma, really, not just for India, but for the entire developing world. How do you lift millions of people out of poverty, achieve that economic prosperity, but do it without destroying the very natural foundation that all that prosperity depends on? The answer is still being written, and believe me, the whole world is watching.